We're good. Hey everyone, welcome today to That's All Funny. Got a guest today. His name is Justin Leslie. He's a Pfizer whistleblower, an investigative journalist, and yeah, you, your story's pretty crazy. I was watching those Rumble documentaries you got on there, and they were pretty twisty with a extra twist on top. How you doing today?
Hey Lorenzo, thank you for having me on. I'm really excited to be able to share my story with your audience. And you're right, it is a bit twisty. The everything that has happened to me. So the documentary itself is called Project Whistleblower, and there are two volumes, volumes one and two, and you guys can find the documentary linked next to my name, Project Whistleblower, justintegrity.net. It's just a spin off of my first name, and I turning integrity into that. So, yeah, I mean, if you have any questions for me, I'm more than happy to answer them, and or I can just go on a little rant and monologue.
Oh, you can do that too whenever you'd like. I was wondering, like you're a pretty even from the documentary and from what I've read, you're a pretty educated person. Like you went to school for all the science. You know, right? Like I don't know the chemicals and all that behind it. So when you went to work for Pfizer, uh, you know, was that like your dream job? Was that something you wanted to do to better the world? What were your like backgrounds
That's
and
a
all that?
good question. So I went to school for pharmaceutical and biomedical sciences, and my whole motive behind that was actually it stemmed from a rare disease that I was diagnosed with called tuberous sclerosis complex. It's a really rare multi-system disorder that is rather debilitating, and it creates benign tumors throughout the body. But I have a very, very mild version of it. So throughout high school, I was like, oh, I got to figure out what I want to do. And, even into college, even, I mean, I was a pharmaceutical sciences major. So I just, I really had to work hard and study pharmacology, study chemistry, study biology, biochem, you name it. I probably took the class,
Mm,
and, um, I woke up like pretty quickly right after I graduated. I mean, COVID hit, quote unquote hit right when I
mhm.
was on spring break, and like I was immediately asking questions within the first week or two. I was like, okay, sure, 15 days to slow the spread or whatever it was that they were repeating. And then I just was like, why are we wearing masks? Like, this really doesn't make any sense. Like if the particle is smaller than what can get through these creases. And, I just was automatically like critically thinking. But I started going to a master's program, which I don't necessarily outline that I wasn't able to even finish my master's program because I didn't take the vaccine. So I
Mm,
was doing a second semester at Rutgers when I was looking for jobs. My second semester was only one class, and so it was a pharmacotherapeutic class while I was looking for jobs, and I just so happened to get hired by Pfizer. When I didn't want to work for any of these vaccine manufacturers. I literally remember this. I had it wasn't like a screaming match or anything, but I was getting a little heated where I was like, "Mom, there's no way in hell I would work for any of these companies," meaning Pfizer, Moderna, or Johnson and Johnson. So it was the exact opposite of what I dreamed of. But sometimes, I mean, I had to trust God and trust that, like of the four interviews, they were the only ones to come calling and come hiring me. So I felt that there was some higher reason of like, okay, if I am probably a one of one person in the situation where I can insert myself into this pharmaceutical giant that is what I believe is committing crimes against humanity potentially, right? Like with the lockstep agenda that was out in play. I felt called to at least go see it for myself and see if I could do something. So
Mhm.
definitely not my dream, you know.
No, what made you, because there's a lot of times, like, let's say, me as a person, not to the same scope of you, but, there's a person working somewhere and they're like, "Ah, this is shady. We gotta do something about it." But more not 10 out of 10 times the person's not gonna do anything, 'cause what does one person do, for to make a change? What, like, motivated you to do that? Because what I know, I was when I listened to your, documentary, you were like, "I don't know if it was me being naive, that I thought, this or that." Like, what motivated you to wanna do this change and not be more so, like, afraid or think that it might actually make a difference, you know?
Um, Considering the circumstances of like a worldwide global vaccine rollout, I think like since it was so big, I just, and since I was working directly on the mRNA vaccine, on a small scale manufacturing team, I wasn't like in large scale operations, but small scale, mostly research and development and stability studies. I just, I'm like a moral, ethical person of like, okay, I'm working on this and I'm seeing people. I literally remember the first woman was a nurse who took the vaccine, and within a minute or so, she literally fell down, like hit her head, with her hand, and was just like, she looked awful. And I was like, okay, this is a vaccine that she just took for this that I'm working on. How is this safe or effective? And it turns out no vaccines are safe and effective, right?
Mhm,
From my whole awakening, but I had to do something and, like, trust God, and, whether I the goal wasn't to wake everybody up, the goal is to wake up the few that have the ears and the eyes to, the ears to listen and the eyes to see, and so, I mean, that's ultimately what the entirety of my documentary is, because I get to, after my whistleblower story was not released by James and Project Veritas, I I felt played, I felt manipulated, I felt betrayed, like for working for 3 months. It was literally a second job what I was doing. Like I didn't renew my rent at the apartment I was at. I like literally hopped over to an Airbnb because they knew I wanted to leave. They knew I felt horrible about working there.
mhm,
And so I just felt betrayed in the end, for what had happened. And so when they offered me employment, it kind of felt like the power of suggestion is interesting. And there's not gonna be an answer to this question of, well, did they want me to leave Pfizer or did they want me to come work for them, to become an undercover journalist so that I wasn't exposing what was going on at Pfizer anymore? Who knows? But when I took that job, I basically said I need to go get my Pfizer story back, and make the difference of make it worth it, because ultimately it was going to go away in vain. Like James and some of the journalists were like, "Oh, what you did, like we learned about it, so it's not going to go away in vain. You can become an undercover journalist and get the same thing." And I was like, just baffled by that statement because that like I knew that they were lying their ass off to my face, basically. Like there's no redoing what I had done, you know
mhm,
in any way, shape, or form, and like then we get to me becoming an undercover journalist and getting the Jordan Tristan Walker story, the PV's biggest story ever, and I ultimately call it out as propaganda because, I say in the film that virology itself, I uncovered during this whole process is a pseudoscience of, pointing out many articles have been written about this. And I mean, I think Christine Massey has done amazing work filing FOIA requests for not just health organizations in Canada, but all over the world, like 220 of them. And so to address that, is really important in my mind because what the directed evolution story ultimately does is, I mean, it says that Pfizer and all these other pharmaceutical companies can mutate viruses and make them more dangerous. But I mean, if you can't isolate or purify a virus, then how can you do that with something that doesn't exist and make it more deadly? You know, it's all this
Mhm.
fear mongering and like trapping our subconscious mind and our conscious mind as a collective to really like perpetrate their next agenda, right? And we're seeing it right now with they're
Mhm.
talking about I think H5N1 in Texas or something is there's some cow that is having it mutate to a snake or I don't know. But it's all horseshit, you know. So sorry, long-winded answer, but yeah.
No, and yeah, I saw you did the investigative. Well, you were undercover first. You got samples of the vaccine, and they, looked at it. What was it? The Project Veritas, right? They looked at it, saw that it was like some parasitic type shady shit, right? And then you couldn't use any of that because apparently, there's what'd you say, like Massachusetts laws against that? I
Well, there
forget.
was there was the state line issue with the vials that they had set it up in a way where we had to do it that way. I had wanted to have Dr. Carrie Madej show up in Boston, but they had her show up in New York. So the way it lined itself out is it was not technically legal in any way, shape, or form. But
Mhm.
apparently the journalists were consulting with the legal team, so it just really doesn't make sense. You know, if you're gonna consult with the legal team and they're gonna check off on it and allow a source to go about it in the way that I was doing was very questionable. And then yes, when we actually went through with it all and saw it under the microscope, yes, there were it was like water parasites and I mean Carrie Madej talks about it being Hydra vulgaris, and I don't really think it's Hydra vulgaris, and I don't think she does either. It's more like just parasites in there in general, like water parasites. They find parasites in vaccines all the time. It's just
Mhm.
because of the heavy metals that are in there. And yeah, it was really nightmare stuff. And I mean, the graphene oxide being in there, she was saying that she was seeing graphene like structures, so she wasn't saying it's graphene oxide, but I mean, to see the Johnson and Johnson, Moderna, and Pfizer vials all at once in the same evening, um, my cortisol levels were through the roof that night. I didn't know what was going on. I was freaking out. It was like a nightmare, and
Mhm.
so I felt like I was doing God's work in a way of like exposing what was in these shots and that you know I mean I even say like God's law, spiritual law of like doing no harm. Like all I really wanted was to inform the masses and tell them like, hey, I'm a Pfizer scientist and this vaccine is really dangerous and it's not even a vaccine. It's just a toxic poison bomb, and it's something you shouldn't be putting in your body. If I was able to say that in late 2021, then people would have had their informed consent, and
Mhm.
I mean, I also was going to blow the whistle on the childhood vaccine because of what I was witnessing inside Pfizer with the vice president, Nick Warren. He was telling me he gamed the FDA and it was just ridiculous, like, that he told me that, and Project Veritas didn't think that that was newsworthy information that I had obtained, so it was just I shake my head.
Well, and that's, I think what everyone really wants nowadays, especially, with lack of a better term, waking up, because woke is such a different term now, but it's transparency, knowing, what's going on. And uh, I don't know what, I saw like with what you said about Project Veritas, and you gave them all this information. And then you even went as far as to go undercover on a date with, who was
Well,
it
so
that you
that was actually I had resigned from working at Pfizer, and
uh-huh,
I took the undercover journalist job. I worked
uh-huh.
at Pfizer for a year and 1 month, and then I went and became an undercover journalist for Project Veritas after they offered me a job.
Mhm. And you went on a date with one of the research and development, right, for Pfizer, and he
He's the director of mRNA scientific planning, Jordan Walker, and he's not in research and development. He's more in like consulting and
oh, my
sales and things
apologies.
like that.
And yeah, he told you that essentially it was all fake, right? All bullshit.
I mean, he told me that Pfizer was apparently mutating COVID, but I mean, he has no evidence of that. The way I look at it is, it sounded like he was trying to impress me on a date, but who knows? I
Mhm.
mean, he said those things to me though. It's not like I was putting words in his mouth.
Yeah,
He,
yeah.
he
He
said
wasn't
those things.
coerced.
So
Yeah. And that's the stuff Project Veritas end up going with, but this is kind of where it takes another twist because they use that sort of to fuel the flames that the virus does in fact exist when
yeah.
the whole point is that it doesn't. And, it's just they're just using whatever information they get from you to twist their narrative like all the news is doing nowadays with everything.
I totally felt like a puppet and manipulated.
and
So
and that and that's why you're kind of like starting your own network for say that just in integrity because I don't know like what's the whole in your opinion, and I know you answer it better than I would because the science. Who gains the advantage of this, or what was like the point of the vaccine like being made or being pushed on us? Was it like to control populations? Is it to sterilize us? Is it
I think
you
it's a
know
combination of both. I think, well,
Mhm,
the depopulation certainly comes from just like the fear mongering of taking the vaccine. Even like, I mean, people in our community love like the fear mongering of like the vaccine is going to kill you, and I mean it has killed people, don't get me wrong, millions of people have died from this thing, but you know I just people in our community love fear mongering about it now as well, and versus like the detoxing that we should be doing and focusing on. But what is the yeah, depopulation for sure was the agenda from the vaccine, from my opinion. And then um, you could totally argue the fertility and sterility of men and women around the world. And I mean, I've heard, the Freudian slip of, I forget the gentleman's name, but he was talking about sterilization when he was talking about the vaccines. And it was on like MSNBC or CNBC or one of those big news organizations. And so, I think it's kind of written on the wall. Like vaccines themselves are just toxic. So, I mean, and these lipid nanoparticles, they go to the testes and they go to the ovaries, and they are carcinogenic by nature. So, if you have a carcinogenic toxin going to reproductive organs, you're more than likely than not going to be seeing some sort of impact on fertility. Whether, I mean, it's not like everyone is going to be impacted literally that takes it, but the it's like life expectancy. Life expectancy, if you've taken these shots, I believe your life expectancy is now 25% less than people who are unvaxxed.
mhm,
So take those percentages and you can apply it with fertility, etc. It's unfortunate, and it's not like it's going to be everybody that is impacted by it. Some people are lucky and probably got saline, more than likely, because if they put, and I can't affirm that, that's just my reasoning behind all of this, is if they gave everyone a death shot or a clot shot or whatever you want to call this thing,
mhm,
if they gave it to everybody, the 4 or 5, however many billion people on this earth that took it, I think it's that high now. I mean, these people would be dropping dead like flies, So I'm just speculating on that, but I feel like a majority of the people, especially the ones that just took the 2 shots and were like, "All right, I'm good," like I pray and hope that those people have learned their lesson and are making moves to detox from this toxic injection. That's the reality of this. So, but yes, it was totally depopulation, a part of the agenda, and it goes to show, and they're still continuing it in their, lockstep agenda, just, through the media, which is a propaganda arm of what we call the United States government, which is literally a foreign corporation at this point. It's like it's not even a government. These people are just doing whatever they want and playing both sides of both wings, and just
Mhm.
it's disgusting. So,
No, yeah, and I know I'm sure you had it growing up too, and I had it growing up very much loyalty to our government, like we're especially around 9/11, you feel, closer to your country, this and that, and whatever opinions you have on that too, with it being a work as well.
oh, it's
Uh,
clearly a false flag. I mean, all you have
yeah.
to do is ask the question about Building 7 and how it fell. I mean, everyone's like, "Oh, we'll never forget about the Twin Towers," right? But we're gonna choose to forget about Building 7. Or if you just watch the frame by frame video of the plane, which looks like a missile flying into the Pentagon. It's
Mhm.
so many coincidences that played out with that. So
No, yeah, it feels like, once you're like you said, you wake up and your eyes are open, everything makes more sense, that everything's a chess move, for plans to something else, even the current wars with Ukraine and all that, they all feel like that. With when the COVID did, first come out and all that, uh what do you think it was? What was who were the people that were like behind it? Really, was it like the World Health Organization, the US, the whole world, the China? Was it, who was it that like started this sort of, and
that's
what
a great
intention?
question.
What intention did they have to start it?
I mean, it's really just the theys, and I mean, I don't even know what that truly means yet. Like the theys are just the people that are like behind the scenes, the powers that be. And to me, it starts with like the bankers that really are what control the politicians, and then who's controlling the bankers. Like it leads to the Federal Reserve, and then you get to the Rothschilds, and then you get to who? Like I mean, you could start pointing the finger at Israel, but like who's controlling Israel? And then it's like, well, does this go all the way back to like the Roman Empire? Like maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure. But I mean, people point the finger at the Jews, people point the finger at the Jesuits, people point the finger at the Catholic Church. And I think it's a huge mixture of all of them. And it's hard to put a finite answer to that, you know, but there's so much deception, and like we have to really critically think as to like what do they want us to get like sucked into and trapped in and not asking questions about, and so I think a lot of the corruption really does go to the Catholic Church ultimately, and I mean they might be using I mean, I look at the Palestine and Israel conflict, and I see it as like it's a way to like get people to get sucked into thinking that the Jews in Israel are really evil, and that there's, this genocide happening, which I'm not saying it's not. Like if to me, like I got sucked into it too, and it's like really it's hard to watch and pay attention to.
Mhm.
Because it's some of it is really gruesome. But like, who are the manipulators behind all of that is really like probably who's behind all of the COVID stuff. So I mean, there it could be like a Russian mafia too. So who knows? Like, I've done a lot of reading and digging into that, and we still don't necessarily know the answers.
No, you're absolutely right, because you just think about it, how it affected so many things, not just health and people's, like morale, but also businesses got shut down. They lost, other businesses took off, the remote stuff, everything, So of course, it could have been anyone or everyone having a hand in it, to I don't know, do something with that. And I know the term whistleblower sounds so like a bad term. It almost sounds like a negative connotation. Like, were you afraid of being a whistleblower? Like, were you afraid of any retaliation or blackballing or
No, not
no?
necessarily. I haven't really been afraid about anything this entire time because I am standing on truth, and with, truth is love and love is truth. And, if people want to like come after me and call, I mean, I'm not lying about anything. Like, I just presented my whole last 3.5 years, and so I mean, was I afraid? Like, leading up to this, maybe, yeah, sure, maybe a little bit, I mean, but when you have fear, like, you kinda just have to, if you know what you're doing is the right thing and you're still scared, right, and then you're afraid, which, yeah, I mean, I wasn't 100% like, "Oh, I'm confident in this," but I've been sitting on this information with this weight on my shoulders for the longest time, and, like, when I was able to get my insider footage back and then show that James went to Bohemian Grove, the whole conspiracy itself is laid out, and so, I'm not saying everyone that goes to Bohemian Grove is necessarily like a pedophile or satanic worshiper or eats babies, I'm not saying that, but I mean, it is an elite group that I'm not gonna get invited there. So, why is James getting invited there? And I mean, I've heard rumors that there are other right-wing conservative gurus that were there this year as well. And so it's really ripe for conspiracy. And the timing of him going was really interesting around the time of the Hawaii fires, and so like, and then he went right after I had resigned. He went to Maui. Like, why didn't he send his journalists there, um, to go investigate in the first place? And so I don't know. It's just so much going on with that as well. And so, like, James's supporters, he has this. I call it like a cult following where like people see James as this savior. And I think that's really dangerous to look at just one person as your savior. Like,
Oh,
the only person that's really going to save you is you. Like, I'm not going to be able to save you, Lorenzo. You're going to have to do that yourself. If like, and that's just, and that goes for me too. Like, I have my own problems. I have my own shit that I got to do, every single
mhm,
day to make sure that I'm going to be the best version of me, and I'm still working on becoming the best version of me, and so, like, I think once we all like really wake up that the people that are in the limelight aren't necessarily like there to save us, they're there to perceive that they're doing this good work, and that somebody is really investigating the bad guys. But the reality is, like, they're probably hanging out with the bad guys, and like with James going to Bohemian Grove, like that it's really ripe for conspiracy, and it it just doesn't make sense. Like, why would the king of investigative journalism and sting operations get invited to this bohemian club? And Alex Jones has talked about it since 2003, and so, like, it brings into question all of Alex Jones's credibility too, like, why is he not taking this at all? Like, why
mhm,
will he not talk to me? Why will he not take the story? It's really interesting to have drawn a line in the sand with the people, that are, the so-called mainstream alternative media now, right? Because hardly anybody watches the mainstream media anymore unless you're like in your 50s and you just turn it on to watch on your couch, but a lot of the younger generation, is catching into the podcasters and, you know, whether big or small, but I mean, InfoWars gets so many people looking at their stuff, and so that is the mainstream alternative media, and it's like an industrial complex, and it's I call it out in the documentary. It's called interactive internet activities, and Patrick Berge was talking about this in relation to the Pandora Papers, and it's all connected to the DoD, and so he's basically connecting dots, saying that all these people that are out there, with these massive platforms that have huge followings are there for a reason, and they are basically government contractors, and they're actually like, the quote unquote deep state, that really knows what is happening in a way, or are supposed to keep their mouths shut on certain topics, and
Mhm.
push certain agendas, so but I mean, I can't necessarily affirm that in the sense that I'm not, Patrick Berge, but I mean, I took part of his whistleblower story to include, so
No, yeah, you can tell even with like the Alex Jones or the alternative media, there's someone behind the scenes too. They're pushing an agenda that might not even be theirs either. It seems like there's always a higher power to answer to, and yeah, for them to not go with what you're saying and this transparent truth, it's like okay, so you're just gonna be okay with showing everything else, but not this. Like, what do you? Why are you suddenly afraid of the truth? you know,
yeah.
uh,
They must
it
be afraid of the truth, because
yeah.
I'm transparent with everything that I've done and put it into the film. I'm willing to talk to Alex Jones. I'll talk to James again. I'll talk like, but he's probably not going to want to talk to me. But that's how I feel. I'm willing to talk to anybody that wants to talk to me.
hmm No, and yeah, your story deserves to be heard. The one of the last things I want to ask you here, and I appreciate your time. Um, people, about the term like wakening up, the red pill, and all that. Do you think people just don't want to, like, like in the movie The Matrix, how there's some people who just want to be in the Matrix, just want to be asleep. There's people now who they know exactly, not exactly what goes in their fast food, but they know it gives them cancer and they still eat it. You know what I mean? Like, do you
Yeah.
think people just don't care? Like, they're like, I don't care about transparency. I just want to live my life. Do you think that has a lot to do with it? Like the world just not caring?
Yeah. And that's a great question. I mean, the Matrix itself, we'll look back on it in another 20 years and be like, "Yep, it's a documentary." I mean, people call it a documentary itself. And, it's a great movie, and, if you look at all the subliminal messaging, I think what the Matrix does a really good job of actually is explaining the programming, the Mr. Smith effect of, like, when you bring up something that doesn't make sense, you know, such as 9/11, which is one of the easiest ones to really snatch onto and be like, "This is a hoax," or and then, I mean, the whole virology thing is definitely really hard, and, like, it triggers people that are, not awake to it at all, and they turn into Mr. Smith, but I think, yeah, a lot of people wanna turn a blind eye to the truth and realize that, like, yeah, we've been duped about literally everything, like, the 99.9% of everything that we see is fake, like, it's
Mhm,
the veil is it hasn't been removed. It's just really thin right now. And like I can see through it and you can see through it, but there are the other people out there that think that they even are able to see through it, right? Like people who are following James and following these people blindly. I'm not saying that following James is bad. Like follow James all you want. Just look at everybody like through a lens of like what is this person doing for me to like what is going on behind the scenes as well, and so um yeah, to answer your question, I mean, yeah, there are certainly people out there that, especially the masses just don't give a what they and they honestly think that people that are questioning their narrative, right, which is what the government feeds them, is correct, and they're like, "Oh, I trust the government because they're looking out for me." Like, well, really, they're actually trying to kill you. And like, I actually like care about mankind, which is why I've done this. Like, I've essentially like I've risked my career, my and
Mhm.
essentially my life as well. Like, I mean, and I'm not suicidal, right? But I mean, if someone, if someone wants to, they would, could try
Mhm.
that, but I think that
Definitely.
would be the dumbest thing that they ever try, because then it would just bring more attention to the story and more attention to the truth. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that, I think. And, I just appreciate you having me on, Lorenzo. It's been a pleasure. And, you've asked good questions, my friend, so if you want to have me back on at another time and do some follow-ups, I'm more than happy to pop back on.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, you definitely, watching your documentary and getting the time to be with you. It's like, yeah, it's scary. Like you said, once you pull the veil and see how the sausage is made, you're like, do I really want to go deeper? And you go deeper, and it's just like, man, everything you see now, you see it like, oh, this isn't real. This isn't
Yeah,
real.
man.
That,
I mean, I've
you
seen
know,
too much, that's my problem, I think.
yeah, yeah, no,
So it's like, "Oh, I don't even know what's real and what's fake," I mean, everything
yeah.
feels like a
uh,
lie,
It
so
it it feels like everything's just a work now, and done for other reasons than it just happening. Uh, but no, I appreciate your time so much. Yeah, I'd love to have you on again and
awesome.
talk
And
more.
for your audience, who has not seen the documentary, it's Project Whistleblower. You can find it at justintegrity.net. And if you guys feel called to support me, I've pretty much worked on this documentary full time, once I resigned. So I haven't exactly been working. And unfortunately, I'm struggling with money. And so, if anyone feels called, I have a givesendgo.com/project whistleblower. And I also have a Cash App and a Zelle that I'm receiving donations to. And I'm also, Give Send Go has prayers. And so I'm reading all the prayers. And if you could just feel called to write a prayer, I will read it. And not asking for. I'm welcoming prayers if you are not able to give, because I totally understand this is not an easy time in our financial situations. So, but thank you again, Lorenzo, for having me on. And I will reach it. We'll communicate soon and work on doing follow-ups if it feels right.
Yeah, no, definitely. I have all your links in the description. Appreciate you, and I'm glad you're not suicidal. And yeah, no, we'll talk real soon again. Thank you
Yes,
so
sir.
much.
Much love, brother. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Take care. Bye.
All right, bye.